Hey guys, Larry Vincent here with The Bridge HC. So glad you can join us. You know, when I was in college, I had a friend that we lovingly referred to as Teddy Ruxpin because he looked like what I thought a human version of that teddy bear, you know, the one who would read stories to you, would look like. Side note, I don't know about you, but I loved putting in other tapes besides stories into Teddy Ruxpin just to hear what he would sound like you know, I don't know, a Metallica tape. But regardless, Teddy, the guy that I'm referring to, literally looked like what the human version of this teddy bear would look like. And after I had graduated, I was on Facebook and I saw Teddy post in all caps, "Why is Christianity so hard?" I don't know. Can you relate to that? I know that I certainly can. And so I got into the comments there and I responded, "Nothing worth having in this world ever comes easy. Hang in there." Thought nothing of it. Turned out Teddy and I had a really good conversation about that comment, and you know, we stayed connected for many years. But to this day, I'm not really sure what came of Teddy or his faith. We lost touch years ago. But his post and his thought there about why Christianity is so hard, it's not an uncommon thought. And while some work their way through it, many don't. You know, I mean, understand, we exist as a church so that people can work their way through difficult conversations and difficult questions just like that one. But not everybody is going to have those conversations. Not everybody's going to do that work. And to be honest, a majority of people who start asking those questions can't find good answers, don't want to find good answers, and so they move on. You know, people often come to Christ or Christianity for numerous reasons that end up being about everything besides Christ. And once reality sets in, all they're left with is their relationship with the church and Jesus. And look, I know for a lot of us, we're like, yeah, that's all you need, but they were hoping for more. Or their relationship just isn't cutting it with the church, or their expectations of who Christ is or who they thought he was going to be didn't match up, and their experience ends up not being what they wanted, so they bail. Today, we continue our series on walking the path, where we take an honest look at where people are at with God. Specifically, we are in the second part of our conversation into what it takes to walk toward God. But what happens when people start walking toward God because they are initially attracted to the message of Christianity, but aren't truly committed to Christ? Now, they may be committed at first, and they may even stay in the faith for a while, but eventually life or the issues of life get in their way, and they leave Christ, and they abandon their faith pretty much altogether. So is there a way to help those of us, or those around us, if it's not really us experiencing it, whose experiences are becoming obstacles to walking towards God? That is what we will spend our time on this evening. And we're going to do it three different ways in our sections. In our first section, we'll start by talking about the obstacle of comfort. How people come to Christianity seeking remedies to their pain or their problems, but aren't really interested in a personal relationship with Jesus. Second section, we'll discuss the obstacle of false commitment. We'll talk about those of us, or those that we know, who commit to Jesus but put him at the very bottom of their priority list. And then finally, in our third section, we'll talk about the help that both perseverance and passion offer to help all of us either continue to the path that God has set for us, or to get back on that path that God has set for us, okay? So let's dive right into our first section, comfort without connection. So here's how we're going to do our text. We're in Luke chapter 8, verses 6 through 14, the parable of the sower, right? But instead of going, you know, verse by verse, or, you know, sectioning it out necessarily, we're going to talk about the path, the obstacle, and then the explanation of what that particular obstacle means, okay? So we're going to look at 2 verses per section. First section, we're going to look at verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 6, and then we're going to jump down to verse, I believe, 13, okay? So here's what Luke writes. Chapter 8, verse 6, words of Jesus. He says, some, and he's talking about the seed there, fell on rocky ground, and when it came up, the plants withered because they had no moisture. Verse 13, here's the explanation Jesus offers about what that rocky path means. Those on the rocky ground are the ones who receive the word with joy when they hear it, but they have no root. They believe for a while, but in the time of testing, they fall away. All right, so let's break down some more, specifically in verse 13, so that we can all understand what's going on here. So those on the rocky ground, those on the rocky path, Jesus says, receives the word. And the word receive there means specifically to take into one's hands, to fully embrace, not just to hold on to it while somebody else has hold on, but to take full possession of. So these people are taking full possession of the things that they are hearing. And Jesus says that they do this with joy. And joy, as you can imagine, it means specifically an ecstatic response. Okay? So think exuberant, think joyful, think as happy as you can get. That's the kind of response we're talking about. So they receive fully what they are hearing, and they are happy to have it. Now, Jesus says that they hear this message, that the message that they hear, they receive. To hear in this context means a mental acceptance. So it's not that they just, okay, I'm listening. No, they actually hear it. Like they consider it in their head, and they say, okay, this makes sense. Let's go with it. And so they accept it. But here's the problem, and this is the problem that the rocky path presents. The rocky path offers no root. It's very shallow, right? And that word root there in the Greek means to have no origin or no foundation. So they have no background, no understanding. You know, they have this maybe even preconceived notion of what they're hearing, but they still want to test it out. It's attractive to them. So what are we talking about here? Right? In other words, those on the rocky path are offered the gift of salvation, right? They receive the gift of salvation. They mentally accept what they are being offered, but they never really experience the fullness of that gift. You know, the salvation that they're being offered is emotional, it's exciting, it strikes a chord within them. But once the high wears off, their faith is over. You know, people can be comforted by the message of Christ without connecting to the person of Christ. They like what they hear, but they want nothing to do with the source. Now, they may not admit that, but by their actions and by their thoughts and by, you know, their devotion, they don't want anything to do with the source. And the source being, in this case, Jesus, because if you remember what he says in the Gospels, he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. And let's be clear, the thing that people are being attracted to, Jesus has created. He is the creator of the message. He is the creator of the words that come to life, right? But the people on the rocky path, they want the results. They want the emotions. They want the positivity without really understanding the author and creator of that faith, of that message. Because people on the rocky path, they want change, but they only want positive ones. They want the solution that will bring the most joy. They want the thing that brings the most peace, that brings the most comfort. But once the emotional high wears off, like I said before, when a problem comes before them and their faith is tested, they'll bail. The people who are on the rocky path are ones that will offer negative consequences to their external life, right? Or they won't accept those negative consequences to their external life. They're not expecting it. And so they pull a Teddy Ruxpin and they exclaim, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't come here for problems. I came here for positivity. I came here to learn a little. I came here to explore myself, right? And as soon as that time of testing, that negative consequence, that difficulty comes, they leave. This is what it means to be on the rocky path. And this is what I want you to hold on to, what I want you to kind of think through as we head into our first set of discussion questions. They're going to pop up here in just a moment. If you are new with us, take about 10 minutes to either answer one or all three of these questions. And if you're with somebody, have that conversation. If you're by yourself, take some time to quietly reflect through these questions. The questions will pop up. Go ahead and push pause when that happens. And when you're ready, hit play. I will be here waiting for you to get right into our second section. Hey guys, welcome back. I hope that first discussion was really good and pointed as we talked about comfort without connection. I was in basic training for the Army during actual 9/11s, the day that the planes hit the towers. And I don't want to talk about the negative things that happened as a result. I really want to talk about the positive. And you're like, okay, how can something positive come out of something so horrific? Well, when the towers hit, we were put on lockdown as a base. And I was asked to lead a prayer group for those who wanted to pray for their families and for those that they knew who may have been impacted directly by the towers. And so I got up and I asked anybody who wanted to join us to come and pray, and we were packed. I mean, we had almost the entire entire company come over and want to pray because they were seeking some kind of comfort due to the atrocities that happened in that moment. And for 2 weeks, every night, I would offer this prayer group, and we would just pray around, our bedding space there, and everybody would join us. It was packed for about 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, nothing. And from what I understand from those that I've talked with outside of the military, that's how the civilian world was as well. Church was packed for 2 weeks, and then on the third Sunday, nothing. And you wonder why, and there's been a lot of studies as to why, and yeah, there's a lot of blame that can be put on the church, but also, as you get into Christianity and as you explore what it really means to follow Jesus, it takes a lot of sacrifice. It takes a lot of dedication. And people who represent the rocky path, they think it's a good idea to come to Christ. They gain that comfort even at the beginning, but they really haven't counted the cost like Jesus talks about, say, in Luke chapter 14. They haven't considered what their faith or life would be like, if they really, truly dove all in with Jesus, especially if something came up that would challenge them, whether that be like a difficult time or difficult teaching, which the Bible is full of. And when those moments do come, those on the rocky path, they crumble. And their faith system and the religious worldview die. This is what happens. This is why people on the rocky path who stay on the rocky path end up not having a faith after a while. Okay? So that's what the rocky path is. Let's move on to our next obstacle by talking about our second section, connection without conviction. We talked about comfort without connection in our first section. Now we move on to connection without conviction. Luke chapter 8, verse 7, and then we're going to jump down to verse 14. Here's what Jesus says. He says, "Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plants." Now, his explanation in verse 14, "The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they do not mature." So, let's talk about what we just read. Now, the thorny path is used here by Jesus, in my opinion, because it's an invasive species. What do I mean by that? Well, the thorny bushes on the path aim to seek and destroy any foreign plant by choking it. Now, the word choked here means to choke. Okay, it's one of those English words that was, that was translated properly. right? But it also means, in a more graphic nature, to suffocate or to drown, right? So it's more than just choking. It's choking to death. It's suffocating, or it's choking to death via drowning. That very painful, drawn out process, as I would imagine it would be, right? That's what we're talking about here. So those that fall among the thorns, Jesus says, are people who hear the word of God and have some initial growth, albeit short, but are overwhelmed by life. And Jesus tells us three ways that they're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by worries, which in the context of which he's talking about means anxious interests, right? So being way too consumed by a certain problem or stress in life, right? Or they're overwhelmed by their riches or their extravagant lifestyle, right? They just have all that they want. They don't have any need whatsoever. They don't stress about money. They can afford everything in their minds, any one. Or they're overwhelmed by their pleasures. They're doing something so gratifying that they don't want to give it up. And as a result, they don't reach their full potential. They do not mature, Jesus says. They never reach the perfection that any Christian, all Christians, are trying to obtain on the other side of this life. So in today's context, there are people who commit to Christ, but put him at the bottom of their priorities. In other words, they hear the word and they receive the gift of salvation, just like those on the rocky path did. But as they go through their salvation journey, or immediately after they're saved, they have worries they can't overcome. They have riches they don't want to leave behind, or pleasures they don't want to stop participating in. And eventually, those other things end up suffocating their faith. Those among the thorns love their worries. They love their riches or pleasures more than they love Jesus, or they focus on those things more so. And I'm not saying that those who love Jesus don't have worries, riches, or pleasures that they struggle with. Of course they do. We all do. It's about where the priority is. Is Jesus the top priority, or are your worries, riches, or pleasures way more important? And just like Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters. So when those of us on the thorny path declare, you can have some of me, Jesus, you just can't have all of me, what happens is that their faith suffers, and what's left is a stagnant faith, waiting for its death by either suffocation or drowning. This is what it means to be on the thorny path. It's a path, it's a faith, that is slowly snuffed out by the things in our world that consume our thoughts and our emotions and our lives. Hold on to that as we head into our second set of discussion questions. As always, take about 10 or 15 minutes to either answer one or all three of these questions. When the questions pop up, hit pause, and then when you're done, hit play, and I will be here to start our third section of conversation. Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you had a really good discussion as we talked about in our last section, connection without conviction. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Founder with Michael Keaton. It's a great movie, one of my favorite movies. But it talks about Ray Kroc, the guy who brought McDonald's into the mainstream and was the one who really made it into a quote-unquote success that it is today. Now, if you don't know anything about this guy wanted to be successful. He was a milkshake machine salesman and often repair guy, and he had the right connections to get McDonald's, or to get his life, into a successful position. And the connections that he had were the original owners of McDonald's. He actually met them on a sales call. They were two brothers who had just a normal, sandwich stand, I think in California, if I'm not mistaken. But unfortunately, this dude had no convictions. And eventually, his drive for success led him to push the original owners out of the business while he raked in all the profits. Now, those among the thorns are people who are attracted to the benefits of the gospel but do not want to commit. They've become comfortable and do not want to change. They think they can survive on their own merits, but eventually their personal stuff gets in the way and they choke out their faith. Now, this is what it means to be on the thorny path. So we've talked about two obstacles thus far. We've talked about the rocky path and the thorny path. And that's all the obstacles we're going to be describing today, because that's where Jesus ends with the obstacles. So instead, let's talk about pushing through those obstacles and overcoming those obstacles and getting back on the path that God has set for us. And I want to do that by talking about perseverance with passion. We've talked about, comfort without conviction, conviction without connection. Now we're talking about perseverance with passion. And I want to do this by reading a text outside of Luke chapter 8. I want to turn to Hebrews chapter 12. So let's read verses 1 through 3. This is what the author of Hebrew writes. He says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary." And this is where you want to highlight if you're a highlighter. "So that you will not grow weary and lose heart." Now, the key is sticking with the faith, and not because of the social or personal benefits, although there pretty much could be social or personal benefits to sticking with Christianity, especially in this country, but because it's the truth. That's what perseverance is. It's sticking with the faith only because it's the truth. Because perseverance moves us from questionable paths, from the rocky paths or the thorny paths that are selfish and self-centered, to put it plainly, to moving from those to God's path, which is everything but selfish and self-centered. See, Jesus is the only one who can move us forward and work us into the good soil, which we're going to be talking about here in 2 weeks, right? So we have to stick with them. If we want to be fruitful and multiply and grow in our Christianity and be closer in our relationship with Christ, we have to stick with Christ. I know it sounds kind of like an obvious statement, but in order to stick with him, we have to persevere if we want to remain on the path that God has for us. And look, in order for us to do that, we're going to need fuel. We're going to need motivation, and that is found in our relationships and our relationships with others, which means that we look to the examples of others, both from the Bible and in our own lives. Right before Hebrews 12 comes Hebrews 11. And I had a New Testament professor, shout out to Dr. Weatherly, who always told us that 11 always comes before 12. And which means that if you're going to read 12, you have to understand chapter 11, right? And in chapter 11 of Hebrews, we have what is lovingly called, or what is famously known as, the Hall of Faith, which is an example of people throughout the Bible who did the hard things and stuck with Christ. But guys, look in your own life. There are people in your own life who have stuck with Christianity, gone through the rocks and the thorns, and have survived, that you can learn from. That gives you fuel to go forward. But it's not just the example of others we have to look to. Obviously, I think we should look at the example of Jesus. He is the author and perfecter of our faith. And so if we focus on Jesus and we see what he did to endure, If we look at his example of how he overcame temptation in the desert, or how he responded to those who persecuted him, who ridiculed him, who challenged him, who made his life a living hell, if we just look at the way he endured and how he persevered, the scripture promises us that we will not grow weary because of the testing of our faith. That is found in the rocky ground. That is found in the rocky ground. Instead of it ruining us, it will motivate us to keep going. Remember, Jesus says all things work to good for those who love Christ and are called according to his purpose. But not only will we survive the tests of our faith that come from the rocky ground, but we will not lose heart due to the stresses that come from the thorny path. No matter what obstacle we face, if we focus on Jesus, we will be able to get through it. Having the perseverance to stick with Christ gives us the conviction to take our faith seriously. And that conviction often shows up through our passion for Jesus. So tie those two together. Because tied together, perseverance and passion will move us forward to God's path and help us stay on it. Because perseverance is found in the amount of passion we have to keep going. So what does this mean for us? What do we need to make sure we are able to do to move past the rocks and the thorns, the rocky and thorny paths? Well, in order to progress towards God and his path, we need both perseverance and passion. You can't have one without the other. It's like faith and works. One can't exist without the other. And so practically then, there are a few things we should all be doing regardless of where we think we are on God's path. Number one, create a goal. What does progression in your faith look like? Where should your faith be, do you think? A month from now, 5 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. Where do you want your faith to be? What kind of person do you want to be, to show people as you become an example of Christ? Write down that goal or goals and show it to someone that can hold you accountable to achieving that progress. Now, I would also recommend writing milestones down or steps down along the way that will help you gauge how well you are doing in achieving your goal. 2, stick with Christ no matter what. Now, easier said than done, I get that, but practically that means that you have to explore your faith through study and prayer so that when obstacles do come, you can lean on the truth of who Jesus is and what he does for you in time of trouble. And then finally, listen to your convictions. You know that gut feeling you get, that within the very depths of who you are when you face stresses and obstacles? Explore it. Don't dive into it. Don't run with it. Not yet, at least. Explore it. Pray about it. Talk about it. Find somebody that you trust and work it out with them. See if it lines up with the truth of God's word. And if it does, then run with it. And don't stop. Because what you will find in time is the passion for God and your faith, both of those, growing inside of you. And you are becoming more confident in understanding what the voice of God sounds like in your life. So many times people ask me, how do you know what the voice of God sounds like? It comes through experience, both in success and failure. There will be times where you're like, aha, that's what the voice of God sounds like. But then there's time where you fall flat on your face. You're like, nope, that wasn't him. But as you examine these gut feelings that you get and these pushes that you have to do one thing or overcome a stress and obstacle, as you explore those and talk about those and line those up with the scriptures and then run with those things, you will get the confidence to hear God's voice. I guarantee it. So that's what we have to do. We have to persevere. We have to do it with passion. Hey guys, I want to start things off with the one thing, okay? And you know, every week I know that it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. You know, all the information that you are gaining, not just from you know my stuff, but from the conversations at your table, or even through your quiet reflection at home, right? And so I always like to kind of wrap things up with one thing that really should guide your thoughts and help you remember the things that you talked about, so that you can focus in on that during your prayer time, your study time, your devotion time, and any other conversations that you might have, okay? So here's the one thing. Perseverance plus passion equal progression. Now, to exemplify this, I want to read a caption from The Guardian, okay? This is where I get my news mostly. Don't send me your news sources. I had a friend do that last night, and I'm actually going to be looking into what he sent me, but I really don't want like 1,000 of them. So, you know, thank you, but you know, just keep that. Anyway, I was reading The Guardian, and this is what I read. Russia no longer has full control of any of the 4 provinces of Ukraine. It says it annexed last week after Ukrainian troops reportedly advanced dozens of kilometers in Kherson province in the south of the country and made additional gains in the east. It goes on to explain that on Monday, the Russian military acknowledged that Kiev's forces had broken through in the Kherson region. It said that the Ukrainian army and its superior tank units had managed to penetrate the depths of our defense around the villages of Zotaya, Bolka, and I'm going to butcher this, but Alexandrovka. Now, if you ever wanted to know what perseverance in today's world looks like, I don't think we should look any further than Ukraine, because Ukraine has it. You know, most of us have forgotten about the war on the other side of the world, but that didn't matter to the Ukrainian soldiers and their allies and even their citizens. They knew and know what we all need to know when it comes to faith. Now, their stuff isn't faith-oriented. Their stuff is just, you know, motivation-driven and, you know, pride in their homeland. But when it comes to faith, there's a lot of things that we can learn from the Ukrainians. Because when it comes to walking toward God, we are the only ones responsible for the path we take. It's not the fault of the church. It's not the fault of the Christian. Yes, sometimes Christians and churches do horrible, outlandish things. But when it comes to the choice that we have to walk towards God, we are the only ones responsible for the path that we take. And we can either turn away from God or we can turn toward God. And if we turn toward God, we have to either be all in or all out. That's really what we've been talking about today. Because that's what determines how we deal with obstacles. And how we deal with obstacles, in turn, determines how whether we are all in or all out. So here's the question. Will you deal with obstacles by succumbing to the rocks and the thorns, or will you passionately persevere with Christ, the author and perfecter of our faith? Will you stick with Jesus, and will you show your love for him and show that through the devotion and the dedication that you have to Christ and the message that he shares? Because that is the only way that we will ever be able to progress toward God and set foot on the path that he has created for us. So where are you at right now? You know, we've been talking about everything from walking away from God and what, you know, from being closed off completely to God, to walking toward God. And then also, though, you know, walking towards God with the obstacles that come in our way. There's been a lot of information over the last 4 weeks. And you know, maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, or maybe you talked about this in your group about, man, God is knocking on your door and you just don't know how to respond right now, or maybe you just have a lot of questions that you don't know how to answer. Well, can I just invite you to connect with us on a personal level? And there's a couple ways that you can do that. You can start the connection by going on to our social medias. All the information is there on the screen right now, and you can private message us, or or direct message us, or you can even email me directly with your questions or your thoughts, or wherever you're at, your feelings. And when we see that, we'll respond back with an answer and an invitation to connect face to face, whether that be via Zoom or in a public setting. We would love to have coffee with you or a meal with you, whatever is most comfortable for you. But we want to connect with you. We want to be able to have that conversation with you, because that's how we grow, right? Even if it's a disagreement, even if you disagree with something that I've said today, contact me, man. I would love to hear you out in a respectful way. Or maybe you want to just experience this live and have conversation with people around you at an individual table, or maybe you want to bring your own family or small group and talk about these things in person with us. We hold services each and every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. at Tri-West Middle School. It doesn't matter if we're on fall break, winter break, whatever. We will have church each and every Tuesday. Okay, 6:30 p.m. We end right around 8 o'clock. We do have a children's program, and they have their own conversational format that is fun and exciting. They have crafts, they have snacks, they have all that great stuff that you would expect. Our children's minister, Holly, is amazing. So bring your children as well. And we also have an online forum, okay? So check out our Facebook page for more information on that. But there is a way to join us each and every week, either online or in person. We would love to have you in person. That would be great. All right. Also, if you are really just resonating with the things that we've been talking about over the last 4 weeks, and you would love to support us in the mission that God has given us to carry out here in Hendricks County, we would love your support, whether it be through a one-time or a regular gift. You can go to donate.thebridgehc.org and create an account on our website and set up all that stuff via our partner Vanco. Okay. All right. With that, guys, that is all that I have for today. I hope you can join us next week. But until then, as always, peace, love, and soul.